Hi, I'm Marlene Dodge, and this is my Module 13 case study, when a student's rights are wronged. Okay, so the problem in this case, it happened at Nottingham High School in a community of Dover. It's the only high school in the district. It occurred on the high school football field, but then the problem further escalated when the student got to school first day back and he was not able to go into the biology classroom. As far as who is involved, the superintendent, Dr. Harvey, although he is not directly involved in this situation, it's more so the principal and the counselor. He is the superintendent, therefore much of this falls onto his shoulders. The principal of Nottingham High School has a little bit more responsibility in this situation when it comes to Miguel Hernandez, the student, and his parents. The school counselor, Ms. Guzman, is the person who has kind of rolled this out, and all the things are happening because of a decision that she has made. And then also Howard Carey is the attorney now that's representing Miguel and his family. I did not include on this list the potential for whoever hit Miguel during the football game, the possibility of a lawsuit that where parents might be pressing charges. I did see this almost as a separate kind of situation. Yes, it could be something involved, and it could fall back that it becomes part more of the superintendent and the principal's problem if it does find out that there's some kind of liability with the school. But oftentimes schools have families sign waivers saying that they won't be held liable. But again, a lot of times those waivers do not stand up in court depending on the circumstances surrounding the injury. But I feel like that is kind of a separate issue that the school may need to deal with on top of this massive problem that they have right now. As far as what happened, again, it was an injury during a football game. He was hit after he had thrown the ball. He was paralyzed from the waist down and now is using a wheelchair for mobility. He had no head injuries. He didn't have anything that affected his ability to learn. Therefore, the only accommodation he really was going to need was going to be a wheelchair to get around. And so he was needing classrooms to be able to accommodate his wheelchair. He ended up having that schedule changed without any notice. He ended up denied FAPE because of this, which is a free, appropriate public education, and it is protected under his Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disability Act. He's basically being denied his basic rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And a 504 plan probably needs to be implemented, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Legal issues and ethical issues involved. Obviously, FAPE and ADA violations are happening here. Also, there should have probably been a 504 plan discussed, at least in a meeting with his parents ahead of time. So that's also an issue that is here. The need for school classrooms to have a universal design with equitable access for all students. Basically, the goal of that 504 plan was to remove the barriers to allow students with disabilities to where they're able to participate in the public education system. And schools receive public funding for this. In this way, it levels the playing field for all of these students that fall under this, and they have the same opportunities as everybody else. So the legal and ethical issues are in breaking down to why didn't the school do what they needed to do to make sure that this student was going to be able to continue his education, and accommodations were going to made to make sure his wheelchair was able to get into each of the classrooms, or some other situation was developed so that he was getting the same education as his peers. Again, we're looking at the facts. I went over some of this. Miguel is a student. He needs accommodations. He does not need modifications to his curriculum. He doesn't need really anything more than wheelchair accessibility throughout the school and in his classrooms. Parents weren't contacted to discuss a schedule change. Miguel didn't find out about it until he arrived at school. An attorney is now involved to ensure that Miguel's rights are protected. And this situation at hand needs to be remedied as quickly as possible to ensure FAPE and ADA compliance. So exactly what happened? A schedule change was given rather than a plan, allowing equitable access to the general education curriculum for a student who only needs wheelchair-accessible rooms, not academic support. In looking at the facts, the people that are involved, the superintendent, he had built great relationships. He had worked really hard to build those relationships within his school, between teachers and parents, and he had developed this great support for their football team. A lot of the community was at this football game. Parents and Miguel have been subjected to stress. They've been wronged due to an injury that was something that was just unforeseeable. And now on top of that, they have the stress of he is now not being considered, and his needs for his college pursuits are not being considered. The counselor obviously doesn't understand FAPE and ADA laws. The situation has now become more complicated due to an attorney becoming involved. And again, the principal needs to correct this wrongdoing. The high school in which many witnessed the injury. So not only do you have a student that was injured, but you have a community that rallies around this football team. He's a star football player, and everybody sees this take place, and they have a big assembly for him, and it recognizes how much they appreciate him and how great they think he is. And then they move on to, now you're not going to be included in the general curriculum anymore because you are now in a wheelchair. This is a massive problem. And it's going to affect more than just the family, more than just the teachers, more than just the principals. Also, part of the problem is this building was built back in the 1950s. They have renovated a lot of it, but there's obvious reconstruction and renovation that needs to be done to improve the state of the building so that it is accessible to all students. Teachers need to be able to create these universal designs in all their classrooms, and that might be something to where they need to have more training on how to create these universal designs and how to make sure that there's enough room for kids to be able to move about no matter what mobility device they may be using for assistance. These are things that the school definitely needs to look at. So anyways, this is the only program, the public high school, that serves 3,200 students in this area. Again, he's college bound. He's been taking these classes. This is the path he's been on. And probably they need to look at some training on FAPE and ADA, probably universal design. There definitely needs to be some training for these laws and regulations that must be followed. And that goes for the counselor. Especially the counselor needs to get this training so that decisions are more informed. Could the situation be damaging to the community or stakeholders? I spoke about this a little bit. The student was wronged because his district lacked the ability to provide equitable access to the classrooms. I think the community would lose a great deal of faith in the high school once this story kind of surfaced and people talk, and that's what happens, and people lose faith in their schools and the decisions that they make. Families hurt not only by the tragedy, but by the school not being culturally responsive. This could be a possible lawsuit for the school, which could be costly for the district. And principal and counselor could lose some credibility. They probably have lost some credibility automatically, and they have to figure out how to regain this. Who has an important stake in the outcome? They need to find justice. They need to get justice in this situation. And justice doesn't have to be, I think the situation can be solved easily, but basically the people that have a stake in this outcome are the student and the family, principal and counselor, the classroom teachers, as well as the attorney, based on whether or not they need to pursue a case. Have all relevant stakeholders been consulted? The superintendent definitely needs to be notified of this situation, especially once an attorney walks into the district, and definitely with some serious backing to be able to make threats for a lawsuit. Principal, evidently, I don't know if they've been consulted if the principal had been asked by the counselor prior to this decision being made. But the principal needs to be on this, the counselor, the parents for Miguel, their attorney, obviously, classroom teachers. Again, I'm going back to that. That's something that, yes, this was in the biology room, but this is going to be a problem beyond the biology room for this school. And then the 504 committee, where were they in all of this? Why was this not an issue before this child came back to school? And then a possible contractor. They may need to start making bids and looking at serious renovations so that they do become more ADA compliant. As far as learning more about the situation, as I think that you would need to know just to the extent of what needs to be done to the classrooms to allow them to be wheelchair accessible. Again, that goes back to trying to figure out, do you need to put bids in? Does this need to be something that needs to go up with the board, that we do need to make necessary changes to the school? Again, what training has the counselor been involved in or included in to avoid this mistake in the future? And then why wasn't the comprehensive meeting set up for the 504 prior to Miguel returning, or to even discuss what kind of accommodations and to make sure everything was ready? Sometimes a 504 plan isn't even a decision that a school just makes, but definitely a meeting should have taken place. And then, was the school contacted prior to the visit from the attorney? Did the parents ever call before this, or did they just show up with the attorney because they were so furious at the just the extreme poor decision making on the school's behalf? Okay, so looking at the possible options. Option number one, awful option, do nothing. Option number two, I wrote apologize, change the schedule and the classroom layout. And then option number three, offer for the class to be taken online in a setting that is more accessible. So in looking at each of these options, obviously do nothing is a horrible option. It would, yes, definitely cause less hassle with needing to change classroom designs and maybe less costly to the school. But you're violating laws. You're going to enter into a law school. The student family's hurt. The school is hurt. School loses federal funding through this because they do get federal funding. And then people could easily lose their jobs in a situation like this. So do nothing is a absolutely horrible option. Option number two, apologize, change the schedule and classroom layout. So the pros are apologizing, I really believe, needs to be the first step. You de-escalate the situation. You admit that you've made a horrible mistake and you need to correct it. Take responsibility as a school. The school is definitely in the wrong. And then you take steps to create classrooms that are accessible to all students, and that the student is going to be able to go right back into his biology classroom and have that same education as his peers. And then by doing this, they'll be able to regain faith as a school district. Cons are there's definitely going to be budget issues involved in this, and there's a lot of embarrassment of faculty not being trained properly. And I think it's just kind of a smear on a school to have a problem like this. And then the third one, offer for the class to be taken online through a virtual means. The student would still get a biology credit. It would save the school some money. Parents may still sue the district over this choice. If this is not this would be something that I think you'd have to weigh very carefully, even in offering something like this. This makes the student singled out if this is some kind of sole decision that could be made, and then there's further damage in relationships both in and outside of the school building. with a decision that is still exclusive. So in looking at the best option, I obviously picked option number 2. And I do think that apologize piece is extremely important. I think it's really important for us to go back as administrators and as people in charge and to be able to look at something and say, we were wrong. How can we fix this for you? And they really need to look at it with families and sit down and have the conversation that should have taken in the first place. But at least it's a place that you can start at. And it does de-escalate a situation. They would probably they need to get that universal design going, and that might need to be options with trainings for teachers, with really building level trainings for universal design. And then also, they probably need to go ahead and have that 504 meeting. It's really kind of a goodwill thing. And I think it would give the parents that assurance that things in the future are not going to happen the way they happen initially, and that the rooms are going to be accessible for their child, and whether or not anything else needs to be created, that could be talked about in the 504 plan, and it might be something that's overlooked. There may be something else that needs to be done to make things okay for Miguel. And so that's extremely important, but he would be protected he would be able to qualify for a 504 plan given his disability. So I think ultimately, this really isn't going to go to the next level. I don't think there's a reason it would need to go to the next level of having an attorney involved any further. I think ultimately probably the parents bringing the attorney to school was them saying that we find this to be horribly wrong and we want a solution. And so I think this does offer this solution to just fix it. The school needs to fix this. And I think ultimately that will stop any future problems. So that is the end of this case study for me. Thank you so much.